Hi, welcome to How to Repair. This video is on how to change the bearings on a Hoover, Candy, Iberian, Teka, Otsein and Zerowatt. It will also work on some other makes listed in the description below. If you cannot find your appliance listed, please visit the website as we have other bearing changes available on the site, all free of charge, plus hundreds of other diagnostic and repair video tutorials. Right, while I'm stripping all the outer panels off this machine, please be aware this type of machine is one of the hardest bearing changes you will have to do. The reason being the front panel on this design of the machine does not come off, so the whole drum has to be lifted out through the top of the machine. You'll notice there that I was taking some photographs of any wiring that you're disconnecting while stripping out the electrics on the machine prior to lifting the drum. This video is quite long, it's nearly 20 minutes altogether, so do bear with us because we will show you the correct way for inserting the new bearings once you've removed the drum. The reason we're actually removing as much as possible is as the drum comes out through the top of the machine, we need to make it as light as possible by removing these counterweights and removing as much as possible with regards panels or anything that's going to obstruct you lifting the drum out. Even to the point you can see there that I was taking the hoses off. Now we're removing the front facial panel. The main reason why I'm removing the facial panel is so you do not damage it when lifting the drum. The soap drawer has to come completely off. And that's the fill hose from the soap drawer. Now we have to remove the front band which holds the door seal onto the front panel, and then we remove the inner band from the tub. Again, you can find in-depth videos on replacing door seals at the website and for this model of machine. There are about 4 or 5 plastic tags that hold this panel in place. You need to be very careful when releasing them as they are fragile and can break easily. Once you've got the panel off, again make sure you take some photographs of the wiring so you can reassemble this correctly. Removing the belt, just pulling it slightly towards you, then removing the electrics off the heater and thermostat, and there is also one earthing wire onto the drum spider which connects at the top. The motor is just block connectors with an earth tag. And then unclip the loom from the drum, and you have 2 bolts on this model of machine for undoing the motor, and then with a large screwdriver just carefully prise it towards you to remove it from the lugs, and then lift the motor, remembering the motor is quite heavy as well. Now the sump hose here needs to come off. Disconnect it from the drum. The reason why I take the hose off completely is as you're doing a total rebuild on it, sometimes you end up with debris inside the hose. Then lift the machine back up. And we're ready to lift the drum out. Make sure you remove any small pipes or anything connected to the drum. Now at this point I do advise you to have someone help you. I work on my own usually in the workshop, so I have to do this myself. The next thing we need to do is remove the front counterweight, so just loosen the bolts first and then extract them completely and lift off the counterweight. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel as that's what keeps us going and able to make these videos for you, and we'd be grateful if you would also join us at Facebook. The page can be linked to from the website or from the YouTube channel. Now we're removing the bolts from the tub. This actually holds the two halves of the tub together, and there's a seal behind this that makes the gasket. I do recommend undoing these opposites. In other words, if you're undoing one at 12 o'clock, do the opposite at 6 o'clock, and then 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, and so on. Once all the bolts have been removed, just with a screwdriver, carefully prise the two halves of the drum apart. You can see the seal that's popping out there. Now, turning the drum over, we need to remove the pulley wheel from the back of the drum. Now you'll notice I'm using some wood on the floor. This is to support the drum so that the metal part of the drum is not touching the floor. You're actually resting the outer drum on the wood. Good little technique there to drop the back end of a screwdriver in when undoing the pulley wheel. It locks it in place. Then lift the pulley wheel off. Now you can see the shaft. I'm putting the nut back onto the shaft until it becomes flush with the top. The reason being is this protects the threads, especially as we have to hit it to prise the shaft away from the bearings. It's got to go all the way down, and you really want to make sure that you hit the shaft squarely on the top, not hitting it from a side angle or anything, because you can bend the shaft. Once it's dropped through, take the nut off, and then you're able to lift the outer tub off the inner tub. At this point you want to inspect the spider and the shaft for any damage before replacing the bearings, just in case you need to get a spider as well. But on a lot of the machines the spider comes with the drum and can lead to an expensive repair, so do inspect this first. Now we're going to knock the bearings out. I'm using a drift here. It's basically a drift which is designed for hitting things like bearings out. Just go round the bearing evenly. Same sort of process as I said with the tub bolts. Just start at 9 o'clock, then go to 3 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and just work your way round, tapping it softly until the bearing comes out. Now we're doing the inner bearing, same process. Usually this is a little bit harder than the back bearing because you're having to knock out the seal as well. So just go round evenly, making sure that you hit the bearing, not the outer casing. You don't want to do any damage to the outer casing, so just take your time and then the whole thing will fall through. And there you go. Right, next job is to clean up the drum, clean up the housing where the bearing sits. I'm going to take this away now and pressure wash it. I always find that's the best. Now we've got two bearings to fit. The inner bearing just goes in, and the smaller bearing goes on the back. Now we're going to use this tool I've made that you can buy from any hardware store. It'll only cost you about £3 to £5, somewhere in that region. You need just to tap the bearings into situ, just so they hold in place. Just lightly tap them, just so the drum's holding them. Now, basically this is a long bolt, about 25 centimeters long, with the inner diameter about 15 to 20 millimeter, depending on the size of bearings. A couple of washers to the size of the bearing, but just slightly smaller. And then you put a nut on both ends and you do it up. And by doing it up, you're actually going to pull the bearings into their locations on the tub correctly and evenly without damaging. A lot of people try to hit the bearings in place, which is not good for the new bearings, as you can damage them and the impact can cause damage to the bearings as well. So just line it all up keep an eye on it when you're doing it up and make sure that the bearings are going in square. I will put full details of the dimensions of this bearing tool on the web page, but as you can see, just doing it up pulls it into location correctly. It's a good idea to have someone helping you with this, as it's quite hard when you're pulling the bearings in, as they are a very tight fit. Just keep doing it up all the way until you cannot turn the bolt any further. That means that you've pulled the bearing into the correct position on the housing. Now, the gap that we have there is for the seal to go in after. But once it's all done up tight, just remove the tool, drop out the washers, and now we're ready to fit the inner seal. The inner seal is designed to make a perfect seal between the shaft and the outer drum of the bearing to stop any water getting through to the bearings. It's usually the seal that actually deteriorates over the time and causes the bearings to rust, and this is what causes the problem with noisy machines in the first place, is that the bearings have started to disintegrate, and it's usually because of water ingress into the bearing. Now, the seal itself needs to be tapped in carefully. I'm using the back end of my mallet hammer here just to tap it all the way around evenly, as I explained earlier, just going from one side to the other, and get it flush to the drum. You can also use the old bearing, which you can see there, to help tap it into place, to stop any damage occurring to the seal when knocking it into place. And there we go. Again, you've got the 3 points on the shaft. The seal fits on to the bush, and the 2 bearings fit onto the shaft. Just drop it down. Now, sometimes they will go on perfectly just by pushing. On other occasions, they will not. A slight tap might help using your piece of wood, but on this shaft it actually didn't go through. So what we're going to do is pull the shaft into the bearings. Now, you can use your washers off the bearing tool, and you can use one of the old bearings if it's still intact. So what we're actually going to do is just put a couple of washers that are larger in inner dimension than the shaft or the bearing hole itself, and then we're going to put the nut back on and pull the drum into the bearings. You can see me just packing it here. You might need to do this 3 or 4 times just to pull it to different levels. As you can see in the inserted video in the top right hand corner, we're actually using an old bearing and a washer, and then we keep packing extra spacing to actually pull the shaft into the bearings by doing the nut up. You can see here I've used 1 old bearing and a couple of washers, and now the spline is clearly visible. This is what the pulley wheel sits on. Now that the spline is totally visible, the pulley wheel can go on and the nut can go on again. Now, you need to do this up as tight as you can by hand, and then I recommend about 1/4 of a turn on top, again using the back end of a hammer or screwdriver. Stop the drum turning, and literally it's going to be stiff, so tight as you possibly can. And then I'm just going to swap over here Put a screwdriver handle in, and I'm going to tap it just a bit extra. And there we go. The next job that we need to do is we need to actually reattach the front of the drum to the main body of the drum. I'm using the wood here just to make sure the drum is nice and stable. Now, I did say earlier I had pressure washed this drum. Make sure it is thoroughly clean, and then put your silicone bead all the way around the drum. And I do recommend fitting a new gasket, and the join in the gasket needs to be at the top of the drum. Now, I didn't actually have a new seal to hand in the workshop here, so I'm just using the old seal, and it's got a split at the top, but I'm just going to put some extra silicone on. But I do recommend fitting a new seal every time. The reason being is after all this work, and when you actually get the machine up and running and you find you've got a leak from the tub, you have to take the whole tub out of the machine again to solve the problem. So it's always worth fitting a new seal. Remember, all the parts that you need for this job and any tools are available from the website, and they will be linked to this tutorial page, which will make it easy for you to find. Now, just fitting the bolts to the drum, and as I explained earlier, once you've started all the screws, got them all in place, you need to do the drum up in a manner which keeps it square, which means if you start at 12 o'clock, go to 6 o'clock, then go to 3 o'clock, then to 9 o'clock, and continue around the drum so that all the screws are done up with even tension. Now I'm attaching the concrete block, as this has to be fitted before the drum goes back in. And make sure that you do it up evenly, and then take it tight, as I said earlier, about a quarter of a turn extra. Try not to over tighten because you could damage the block itself. And now we'll fit the drum back into the machine. Again, I do recommend having someone to help you do this because it's quite heavy, and you need to guide the suspension legs into their appropriate position. And then of course you've got to hang the springs from the top of the drum onto the chassis, and when there's two of you it's much easier. I'm just locating the suspension legs. Good idea to put some fresh grease on them as well, and just follow this whole tutorial in reverse for reassembly. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and join us on Facebook, and don't forget to mark the website to your favourites. Thanks very much indeed for watching. I hope we helped you.